If I could have your attention, please. There sounds like there's a lot of good fellowship around the table. I hope that you enjoyed your meal. It was a wonderful meal. Let's give our servers and the cooks and the people who have served us. I hope you've been enjoying your dessert. Did everybody get dessert? Oh, well, mine was very good. Actually, I want to remind you that we are actually, after the program here, we're having a dessert and coffee. It's going to be outside in the lobby area, and so you will be getting dessert. But unfortunately, you've got to get through me to the dessert. I mean, that's the issue. This is a very important night. We have some awards to give out. We have some people to honor. And I do have a few words I want to share with you this evening. And it's always dangerous when I step outside the podium, which means I have no notes. I feel like I'm really far away because we're going to have a dance, and I do dance, so I'm looking forward to that. Carrie Ertley and I won a dance contest back in Richmond several years ago, so I do know how to shake a leg and other parts of my body too. So I look forward to that time later this evening in the celebration, which is that evening will be brought to us by Jap and Betty Keith. And so let's give Jap and Betty a hand for doing that for us. In the summer of 1965, I found myself packing my bag, getting ready to go to summer camp at Epworth by the Sea, located on St. Simon's Island off the coast of Georgia. It's a United Methodist Church camp. I loved going to summer camp because at summer camp you could enter into the milieu as you are, not as people somehow describe you in your hometown. I mean, the people at summer camp, when you came to summer camp, they didn't know what kind of car your parents drove, what neighborhood you lived in, which school you went to, what jobs your parents had, what grades you made in school, whether you were a football player or not. You just entered in, and as you were introduced and engaged one another, your relationships were formed. And so I found myself packing my bag to go to the camp the next week. I wanted to make sure I got the right T-shirt, and I wanted to make sure that I packed my sandals, because sandals were cool back in 1965. And I wanted to make sure I got the right bathing suit, because when I walked down the side of the pool, I wanted to make sure I looked really good. And then, of course, I wanted to make sure I had that cologne, 4711, as advertised in the Playboy magazine, you know, that... Now, I have to admit to you that as I packed my bags, I was probably not like a lot of other people. Most people who were packing their bags to go to summer camp were packing their bags to meet the Lord. I was packing my bags to meet a girl. And so that was my intention. So the next Monday when I arrived at Epworth by the Sea on St. Simon's Island, and I was in the registration line, I was scoping out the other individuals in the registration lines along and along. And as I was scoping out the different people, I did notice that there was a group of girls in several lines over. And one of them had this startling blue eyes. I call them Jeffrey Hunter eyes. She had long, dark hair, and the eyes were set off by her hair in her face. Now, Jeffrey Hunter, if you don't know, and some of you may not, you may be too young to remember, he starred as Jesus in The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1963. And he had long, dark hair, and he had these light blue eyes that just seemed to pierce your soul, and he knew exactly what you were thinking. I realize today that was completely out of cultural and ethnic context, but for a 14 or 13-year-old looking at this, I thought, this is the way Jesus looks at you, through these light blue eyes, piercing eyes. And that's the way this girl had, and so it really made me really notice her. When I finished the registration and I went outside, this girl and her friends were talking outside, and I walked up to them and I began to talk with them. And I found out they were from a town not too far from where I lived, about 60 miles. And then I also found out something really important because I thought this girl was so attractive that she had been in the Miss Teenage Georgia contest the year before. In fact, she was the first runner-up in the Miss Teenage Georgia contest. Now, what makes that important is that's like a stamp of approval, you know. It's not just me that thinks this person is attractive, but that means there's an outside committee, kind of like the good housekeeping seal of approval on a product, you know, that you're going to purchase. So I thought, man, I think she's attractive, but the agency, the committee, the program of Miss Teenage Georgia, and, you know, even though she was just first runner-up, I never imagined even meeting anyone that would be in the Miss Teenage Georgia contest. Well, as we talked and related to one another, I began to wonder, would this be my church camp girlfriend? Would this be the one? And sure enough, as we related to one another, we began to hook up. Now, in 1965, at United Methodist Church Camp, hooking up meant that you would go to breakfast with one another, and you would go to lunch with one another, and you would walk from meeting to meeting, and you may hold hands as you walk from those meetings, and when you were in the plenary sessions, if you were brave enough, you may put your arm around the person. And so it was that week. As the week went on, I began to wonder, could I somehow move this relationship to the next level, right? And the next level would become boyfriend and girlfriend after church camp. And so I began to envision that. I began to think about that and plan on that. Because you see, there was testimony night coming up and the bonfire. And those of you who are of church camp tradition know that on Thursday night with the testimony time and bonfire time, people seem to be a little closer to one another. And so it was. All that meant was on the way back from testimony night to the cabin to say goodnight, you would sometimes steal a kiss. It's pretty radical stuff. And so it was that week. And so then I thought, maybe it looks like it's going that way, that we're going to move our relationship to that next level and become boyfriend and girlfriend and relate to one another after church camp. And who knows where that could go. And she is the first runner-up of the Miss Teenage Georgia contest. So I found myself on Friday afternoon, after lunch, after the Friday morning program and the lunch, her mother had come to pick her up, and I found myself there standing at the car, because for those of you who are too young to remember, this was prior to air conditioning in cars. I found myself leaning into the window talking to this girl and her two friends. Now, this was a very important engagement because I knew that if her friends liked me, they had this several-hour drive home, that they would impress her that I was a kind of a nice guy, and then that would help move me to that next level of relationship. And so I did my thing. I worked my magic. I did my mojo, I was working it, and they seemed to be enjoying it, and all of a sudden I heard her mother say, "It's time to go." I ignored it, as any teenager would, and they seemed to ignore it too, so we kept doing our thing. I kept talking, I kept, laughing, they kept giggling, we were just going to it, and the mother said again, "It's time to go." Once more, I ignored it. They did too. We kept talking. I'm thinking, this is really working good. I think I'm getting there. I think I'm kind of accomplishing my goals. And about that time, the mother said, "We're leaving," and cranked up the car. And as she cranked up the car, it kind of shocked me, and I stood up. And as I stood up, the car pulled away. And I'm standing there in the middle of the driveway at Everett by the Sea, which was made of seashells, and the white sand and the white dust were swirling up, and the sun was beating down, and it was hotter than Hades. And I'm not feeling sure. Did we connect? Did we say the thing? Did I say the thing that needed to be said? And all of a sudden, I found myself screaming out, "Will I ever see you again?" And I watched the car roll away. But just before it hit the hard road, a head popped out the window, turned around, looked back, and screamed back, "Jeremiah 29:13. I'm not a biblical scholar. I mean, I was stunned. I would have certainly taken yes. I would have loved to hear, come to see me. I would have accepted, call me. I would have gotten by with, let's write. But Jeremiah 29:13 just didn't do much for me. And I stood there in this hot sun and watching her leave and thinking, what in the world does that mean? I know this is church camp, but come on. And then it hit me, it's a code. It's a code. But you see, I had packed to meet a girl and not meet the Lord, and I did not have a Bible. But I knew that there was a Southern Baptist at that camp somewhere. And I found me a Southern Baptist, and that Southern Baptist did have a Bible. His grandmother had sent him to the Methodist church camp, and I said, can I have your Bible? And he gave it to me, and it was the true Word of God. It was the King James Version of the Bible. And I opened that Bible up to Jeremiah 29:13, and it said, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Oh. And my wife's here tonight. I did not seek her with all my heart. If this had been a Harlequin romance, we would know the rest of the story, wouldn't we? If it had been a Hallmark movie made for TV, we would know what the rest of the story was. If it had been one of those movies by Sparks, The Bridges of Madison County, The Notebook, The Long Rider, we would know what the rest of the story would be. But it was not to be, because I did not seek her with all my heart. I mean, I went to see her one time. We wrote, we called, but I was 15 years old, and you know how that goes. And I do not remember what she looks like. I do not remember her name. I just kind of remember that she had long hair, but I couldn't tell you whether it was black or brown. I do remember the eyes more for Jeffrey Hunter than for her. But I have never forgotten Jeremiah 29:13. Because it is branded on my forehead. It is my eyes still, when I close it, see the words coming at me. Several years later, I went to Young Harris College as a freshman, scared to death. My parents didn't even take me. I had a cousin drop me off and leave me, and I was kind of out there by myself, and I met my roommate who I didn't know, and that first day we decided, well, let's go to lunch. I knew a couple of sophomores there, but not really many. But as we walked up to the lunchroom of Young Harris College, this door opened and out walked this girl that I knew. And I said, hey, Jackie, how you doing? And she said, David. And she said, well, I want to introduce you to my friends. And so 6 girls rolled out across the steps of the cafeteria there at Young Harris. And she was telling me who they were. And there was one there that had the most beautiful eyes, had a wonderful smile. And after 43 years and 2 children and 5 grandchildren, I love her more than the day I did. I walked down the aisle. So I know the difference than seeking something with all your heart and not seeking something with all your heart. I've been thinking recently a lot about, well, recently, really for the last year and a half, about ACPE, maybe 2.5 years. And I wonder, what are we seeking with all of our heart? You know, we're seeking, but what are we seeking with all of our heart? And what is it that we're seeking? I was born in 1950. And I don't know if it was because I was born in 1950, but I have an affinity for numbers that are divided by 5 or 10. Part of that is that it's easy to divide. But the other part is there's something about them I just love. And when I became president of ACPE and I was looking through some history, I found out that I was the 25th president of ACPE, and I thought, how cool is that to be the 25th president? Okay, it doesn't mean anything to you. I'm thinking it's pretty cool. And then I realized as I was getting ready for the speech that this is the 90th anniversary of Anton Boysen's great experiment, we call CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. And so I began to think about what does it mean to be the 25th, and what did that first president almost 50 years ago think about what the 25th president was going to be looking at. And I began to wonder, what is the 30th president of ACPE going to be dealing with? And what will ACPE look like in 10 years on the 100th anniversary of Anton Boysen's great experiment? And as I began to think about that, I began to get excited, because there's some exciting things going on that we're dealing with within our organization that is moving us forward in a way that I can see us looking a lot different in 10 years when we celebrate Anton Boysen's 100th anniversary, and when that 30th president gets up to talk to you about the life and work of ACPE. Part of that is through our many task force that we have. We have 5 task force, and we're using a platform in those task force of accountability, consistency, relevance, and sustainability. This platform allows us to work in concert with one another and to work in union with one another in a way that I think is providing us a platform for the future that will make and ensure our organization in a very real and vital and vibrant way. Our certification task force is asking the question, why do we do it the way we do it? I mean, are we delivering a consistent product? And is the product that we're delivering, is the style and what we're doing, is it relevant in today's world of adult education? And that's a wonderful question to ask. And as they ask that question, it allows them to look at what we do in terms of our certification in totally new and different ways. And then we had the professional development task force grow out of that, because as we began to look at certification, we said, well, you know, we're doing a really good job at this certification for level 1, level 2 people, but what about SES work? Are we training people better to be supervisors in education? And so we have to ask ourselves, based on that platform, are we providing a consistent product that we are delivering the most adequate education to those people who want to become supervisors of supervisors? And they're looking at peer reviews. And are we accountable to one another in our peer review? Are we accountable to our organization? They're looking at continuing education, and are we accountable to the profession? And if we're going to move our organization to the next level, are we going to be able to do that without doing something about peer reviews and continuing education and some kind of consistent model of educating our individuals who want to train those who are in the supervisory education process? And that's exciting work as they look at that. And then we have the international task force. Well, we got into that because we had people who were being certified here in this country who said, you know, we want to go back to our home countries, and we believe in ACPE and what ACPE stands for, and we want to take what we've learned back to our home country and nurture and nourish those people there who want to know about clinical training. And we said, that's great, we're going to celebrate that, that's so wonderful, do that. But come back in 3 years and make sure you do a unit of ACPE, CPE in the United States, or we're going to take your credentials away from you. And come back in 5 years and make sure you do a peer review here, or we're going to take your credentials away from you. And we had to say, well, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? And so they've been working on that, and they've basically begun to solve that problem. But what happened when we began to say we're interested in the international community, we have people saying we want to be a part of that task force because people in Zimbabwe want ACPE, CPE. People in Mexico want ACPE, CPE. People in the Philippines want ACPE, CPE. We have a supervisor in Hong Kong who for at least 10 years has been waving the banner of ACPE, CPE, saying it's the premium product of clinical pastoral education, and we want to make sure people in Hong Kong know that and take ACPE-based CPE. But we have no way of doing that at this time. And so if we're going to go to the next level and we're going to provide some kind of accountability to those people we train, we've got to do something about our international relationships. And if we do something about our international relationship, it may mean that by going to the next level, we can say that we are the international provider of clinical pastoral education in a multi-faith community. That would be a whole different way of looking at ourselves, wouldn't it? Then we have the impaired supervisors task force. This task force actually started with our RDs because they were saying, you know, we have supervisors who are hurting. And we don't have a way of entering into relationship with them. So the task force began to ask the question, are we accountable to one another throughout our career? And if we're accountable, how do we engage one another? Because we know there are supervisors out there who are hurting. And we see that hurting as they move from center to center, region to region. When there's a whiff of some kind of ethics problem, ethics violation, but even though it doesn't come to fruition, but there's a whiff of that. And we watch them. And that's all we do. We just continue to watch them, and then we wait till they implode, burn out, or lose their credentials, as we've had 2 members this year have their credentials lifted for ethics violation. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we accountable to one another? Within our relationship, within this guild, this body of people who believe in this pastoral education, the spiritual education that do, are we accountable? And if we're accountable, what can we do? How can we intervene earlier in someone's career when they're hurting? And so this task force has moved on a policy and procedure to the Professional Ethics Committee to look at how we can create that for us so that we can save our colleagues as opposed to watch them crash and burn. And then the last task force that's at work is our governance task force. But we have renamed that because as the work was being done, we realized we're really talking about an organizational design format. This also, too, started with discussions with the RDs. And then they kind of brought that to the board, and we began to look at that. And it really is saying, how are we designed, and is the business model that we have in ACPE, is it sustainable? If we're going to move to the next level, well, the business model that we have, will it take us there? Or are we locked in something? And I do wonder, that first president 50 years ago, did he think that the business model that he was helping organize, that it would still be the business model that we would be using 50 years later? About a month or so ago, it finally just hit me out of the blue one day when I was thinking about this, and I may be a slow learner, and you may already know this, but you know, we have like 10 businesses under one umbrella. If you think of the 9 regions in the national office, that's 10 businesses. So I called Trace up with this wonderful insight, and I said, Trace, do you realize we have 10 businesses? And he said, well, you know, if you count the FCPE, we have 11. Oh, yeah. And he said, well, just a second now. If we think about the networks, we may have 13 or 14 businesses, all linked together, all independent, all functioning on their own, and yet we're tied together legally. Well, I don't want to get into all those things, but I just want to stick 1 second just to impress upon you what we're looking at in terms of organizational design, some of the problems that may prevent us from moving ourselves to the next level. If you think of these 10 businesses, which we're very comfortable with because we've been doing it our whole lives, right? That's 10 executives, 10 leadership councils, 10 budgets, 10 governances, 10 different formats of assessing fees, 10 accreditations, 10 certifications, 10 standards, 10 professional ethics. You can be in this region here and know this region very well and be active in it, and you can move to another region over there, and you might as well move to another country because everything is done differently. And you have to ask yourself, is that the business model that we want to sustain us going forward? And will that business model sustain us? And in this day and age of nimbleness, and in this day and age of lean technology, and in this day of communication, is this the business model that we need that will assist us in moving to the next level? The next level where we are the premier provider of international clinical pastoral education in a global economy and global market. Is the way we do business, is it going to help us achieve that goal and become that reality? Being the 90th anniversary of Anton Boysen's great experiment, I've spent a little time thinking about Anton, and I went to Stephen King's book on the history to make sure that this was the 90th anniversary so I could divide it by 9 and have 9 decades. See how cool that is? And I looked at that, and he said he had 4 students. Now, Anton Boysen started in a mental hospital. I don't know if you know the history. I hope you do, that Anton Boysen had a little mental problem, had a small psychotic break. And out of that, he was able to use his understanding of his theology and spirituality to pull himself out of that. Now, I did my training in state mental hospitals back in the 80s, and I know what mental illness looked like with medication. I can't imagine what mental illness looked like in 1925 without any medication. But he was so impressed they were so impressed when he pulled himself out of his own psychosis that they hired him to be the chaplain at Worcester Hospital. And then he thought, man, I need to teach people how to do this. So he invited 4 students in. Now, Helen Flanders Dunbar was doing research there, but he invited 4 students, and they came. Now, those students had to maintain their anxiety, I'm sure. They worked as orderlies during the day, and then at night they studied. And I have his cases, and they're fascinating cases. He didn't do verbatims as we do. He did case studies. But they studied during the evenings with him. What I did not know is of those 4 students, only one of them finished. Only one. It would not have been an accredited unit of CPE. He would not have been certified because he lost all of his students. But he hang on to that one, and I thought about what did it take for that one to maintain their anxiety in the midst of that and finish the course. And what happened to Anton Boysen when he only had one finish? Something lit a fire in him, and he searched with all of his heart. And because he searched with that reality of clinical pastoral education with all of his heart, we are gathered here this evening, 90 years later, to celebrate that legacy, really, but our own legacy of ACPE. And then that student, because that student was able to maintain their anxiety, and we do not know why the other students left, but we know Ed Friedman says, when you have anxiety, you have reactivity. And so their reaction to what they were seeing, we do not know what that was like, but for some reason, each of them fell by the wayside. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that this week, this last couple of weeks, about what the legacy that we have, that 4 started, 1 finished, but we're here today because of it. And so when I think about that, and I think about where we are, and I think about moving to the next level and what it will be like when we celebrate Anton Boysen's 100th anniversary of the great experiment we call clinical pastoral education, will we be able to proclaim that we are the international provider of premier multi-faith clinical pastoral education? I think so. And I'm ready to search for it with all my heart. And I invite you to join me. Thank you.